Hello, class. Today we're going to be talking about sustainability and environmental policy. My name is Paul Bertolo. This is Taylor Carrick, and this is our presentation. So starting off with the table of contents, we're going to go over origins of sustainability, then rights of future generations, non-declining utility, and then sustaining opportunities. So sustainability, the kind of main idea behind it, was first proposed by Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States and a founding father. And he said that the earth belongs in usufruct to the living, usufruct meaning the right of temporary possession, use, or enjoyment of the advantages of property belonging to another so far as may be had without causing damage or prejudice to this. And what he meant by that was that members of society have the right to economic benefit from the environment, but they also have a duty to preserve natural resources for the benefit of future generations. Because while we're able to reap the rewards that the earth gives us, we are not actually in full possession of it. We are only on temporary possession of it. So we should make sure that we keep it intact for the future. And someone else that had some ideas on sustainability was G. Ford Pinchot, who was the founder of the Yale School of Forestry and the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service. And he said that he recognizes fully the right of the present generation to use what it needs and all it needs of the natural resources now available, but also recognizes equally our obligation so to use what we need, that our descendants shall not be deprived of what they need. So this is more of a utilitarian way of looking at it, and he was considered a utilitarian, but he did emphasize the importance of intergenerational fairness, which is something we're going to discuss further in the presentation. And his framework guided the U.S. forest, land, and fishery resources in the early 20th century. So questions that we're going to be answering in this presentation are: do future generations have well-defined rights that place restraints on short-term social, political, and economic decisions? Can questions of sustainability be reduced to maintaining the utility or well-being of a typical member of society? And under what circumstances do the rights of future generations entail a specific duty to conserve and protect the environment? So a key concept here is strong versus weak sustainability. The author of this paper is a strong proponent of strong sustainability. Strong sustainability means that the environment should be protected at all costs, and advocates for the protection and conservation of the environment and natural resources, as they are seen to be an unsubstitutable means of capital that cannot be substituted with economic capital, as opposed to weak sustainability, which advocates for some conservation and protection of the environment, but only does so at the expense of not sacrificing growth, as natural capital could be substituted with economic capital. So these are two theories. One states that it's unsubstitutable, the other one states that it is. So the duties of today's society, what we're going to be talking about is, does today's society hold a moral duty to ensure human life opportunities are equitably distributed between contemporaries and maintained or improved from generation to generation? The problem is that gauging future welfare is difficult, especially off of current data alone. So two propositions to maintain opportunities for future generations at this moment are to conserve and protect natural resources and develop policies that ensure future generations fairly and proportionally share the net benefits or losses of depleted or degraded resources. So if we are going to cause some harm to the environment or make things better for them, we want it to be fair in the future. And now we're going to be discussing the arguments philosophically of the rights of future generations, and do their rights impose correlative duties on present decision makers? So do their rights affect our decisions today? The first argument is that issues of moral good must be decided by appeals to a social welfare function that balances the respective interests of each member of society. So what that means is that we should look at things through a utilitarian perspective and maximize utility. However, this was contested by Rawls, Bunchen, Locke, and Sen, and what Locke said was that we should secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. So he was thinking more in lines of maximizing freedom and extending freedoms, as opposed to maximizing welfare as the fundamental objective. Argument 2 says that moral duties are defined by the norms of mutual forbearance between individuals having the reciprocal power to confer benefits or inflict harm on one another. So what this states is that since unborn future generations have no effect on the welfare or freedoms enjoyed by today's society, they don't have any moral claims that impose binding duties on the present. So present sacrifices in welfare and freedom for future generations could still occur, but it would be out of love or altruism rather than moral obligation. What he's stating here is that since the future cannot actually affect us today, we shouldn't have to worry about what they think or about their rights, because they can't do anything to affect us today, good or bad. However, the problems with this argument is that if we were to apply it to everyday life today, it would imply that it's morally permissible to inflict harms or infirm people who are fundamentally unable to aid or hurt us, such as young children or the elderly. But we all consider this to be wrong. So Smith and Kant argue that moral duty should appeal to the idea of an impartial spectator or judge. So it shouldn't be decided by us not knowing, not being affected by future generations, but rather, for example, an impartial judge that would see both and think, okay, if the roles were reversed, would it be unjust? So the right action entails the protection of the powerless from the powerful. The future generation in this case would be powerless and we'd be the powerful. And the right action would be for them to be protected from us harming them. And we should look always to make sure that if we were in their situation, would we consider this to be unfair? Argument 3 is that actions taken by present decision makers will not only affect future welfare, but also the identities of future humans. This is by Schwartz Parfit. Lifestyle changes that may be beneficial could create subtle but systematic changes that would affect the types of couples that get together and thereby their offspring. This is kind of a weird one, but what it's saying is kind of reinforcing that fact of gauging future welfare and how difficult it is. And what Schwartz Parfit are saying here is that anything that we do today could change the entire makeup and identity of the humans in the future, because the way that we kind of hierarchically rank our societies today, if we make some changes, the way that we rank them could change, and that could affect the types of couples that get together. For example, as we know, like in the medieval times, like aristocrats would stay in their classes. He's pretty much saying something like that in terms of if we change the structure of our society, it could affect the types of people that get together, higher classes, lower classes, stuff like that. So future generations have limited moral claims on their predecessors' decisions and should be thankful for being brought into existence by them at all, rather than some potential people who might have had better lives. So he's just saying they should be thankful for even being alive because we brought them there. And he disregards the undeniable obligations adults have towards the children who currently populate today's earth. So the analysis of this is, what do we owe future generations? Suppose we agree that all members of society should enjoy a similar set of fundamental freedoms. This is the most reasonable one in terms of what most of us would think. The reasoning being, a rational person would not freely consent to a set of arrangements that place them at a comparative disadvantage in terms of equality of rights and opportunities. Therefore, each successive generation holds a moral duty to pass on a set of undiminished life opportunities to its children and grandchildren. While present generations have the rights to deplete resources and engage in activities that increase short-term welfare at the expense of the future welfare, doing so would go against our moral obligation to provide for the young people of tomorrow. I'm going to be passing it on to Taylor now to continue the second part of the presentation.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about some non-declining utility. And the first two economists were Pezet and Solo, who proposed that sustainability is defined by how well a typical member of society can maintain utility. As over generations, it is not required to protect specific natural resources. Because if the social cost of harvesting resources are offset through investments in capital or infrastructure, or the money from harvesting natural resources are put towards technological advancements such as solar panels or wind turbines. And Solo quoted, "I doubt that I would feel myself better off if I had found the world exactly as the Iroquois left it, which was a time that nature was free-flowing and unaffected." So the issue with non-declining utility is the preferences of future generations can't be made, like, interpreted by making the current generation, because we have absolutely no idea how they're going to feel or what their cultural, like, thought processes will be. And especially as time has passed historically, changes in technology and culture mean that different generations have different values and value nature in completely different ways. So trying to predict the needs and wants of future generations is speculative and could just lead to intergenerational conflict, with future generations disliking past generations due to the ideas that they had. So a solution by a man named John Hardwick, who was an economist at Queen's University, he proposed the net investment rule as a possible solution, which concentrated on a substitution of manufactured capital for a non-renewable resource. So the net investment rule was stated that dynamic economics maintain a constant or increasing level of per capita utility, but only if investments into manufactured capital exceeds the monetary value for any natural resource extraction on an economy-wide basis. So the assumptions that it had was: one, population, technology, and preferences must all be held at a constant. The economy must be closed, or else terms of trade must be constant, and resources must be allocated in a perfectly efficient manner under conditions of perfect foresight. So the issues with this from multiple economists were: one from Breck was the sustainable investment minimum does not look far enough into the future, which means you have to look into a very distant future or an almost infinite future to actually be able to determine a real minimum for sustainable investment. And Aschheim showed in multiple analyses that it is required for investments into manufactured capital to exceed the monetary value of natural resource depletion for sustainability to take place. However, it does not necessarily mean that it is considered sufficient to ensure that an economy is still sustainable. The assumption that resources will be allocated efficiently is not a reasonable assumption, as there are many uncertainties regarding how many resources are still out there. So, like, for example, oil extraction, we have no gauge of, or real gauge of, when that will be fully depleted. So moving on to sustaining opportunities, mainly Sen's development as freedom, which presents a detailed and strong analysis of a view that the public policies should aim towards in order to make people's lives better from a utility and welfare standpoint. But it's aimed predominantly at improving the lives of those in developing countries, as they rely more on nature and the environment to survive, for example, farming. And he supports principles that are core in the defense of liberal political and democratic organizations. And this development of freedom has 5 main factors, which are political freedom, people's ability to participate in and duly influence prevailing systems of governance, economic facilities, especially the access to education, because having a higher and more educated population leads to better and stronger decision making. Social opportunities, the integrity of basic social institutions as they contribute to the quality of life and the sustenance of well-being. Transparency guarantees the openness and institutionalized honesty that are essential in forestalling corruption, so that people have more transparent views of what their government are trying to do and what policies they're trying to put in place. And protective security, so having access to adequate healthcare and social insurance programs. So the implications of Sen's framework was quoted as worsening threats to our environment and to the sustainability of our economic and social lives. So Sen identified those said threats as deprivations, as they have negative effects on both developed countries and developing countries, and maintaining access to natural resources provides benefits to human life and well-being. Like I said, especially in those low-income rural areas where they rely on nature and the environment to, well, survive. Which then led to the fair sharing principle. So ceteris paribus, which means all other things being equal, every member of society, either present or future, is entitled to fairly reap the benefits provided from environmental resources, which basically means that we shouldn't fully deplete any natural resource so that future generations have equal opportunity to take advantage of those resources. The approach is very consistent to the ones that were stated at the start of the presentation of Thomas Jefferson and before Pinchot, as the present generation has no legitimate right to completely deplete or harm the environment without giving back to the future generations that would have had the opportunity to use it. So having an appropriate compensation for the future generations, there's 2 main options for this. One is the provisioning of adequate technological replacements. So for example, having low-cost solar panels in the event that the current generation completely runs through all of the oil reserves. And the other one is monetary payments transmitted through durable organizations. So like banks that will be around for hundreds of years, but that's pretty hard in reality to justify, as banks will often withdraw their assets for short-term benefits and investments. So main three concerns over sustainability are providing future generations with ex ante entitlements to natural resources risks, as it risks locking up resources, which would mean that future generations can't have any access to those resources, so fully depleting, for example, as it would have reduced economic efficiency and stall the improvement of living standards for potentially present and then future generations. Secondly, the costs and benefits that resource depletion would impose on future generations must be established with a reasonable degree of confidence. And thirdly, members of future generations must receive full compensation for the costs imposed by resource depletion, which obviously currently there might not be such compensation in place.